Welcome to the Mental Minute, an AI-generated podcast. We're doing a deep dive today into something called Hick's Law.
Okay.
Have you heard of this one?
Yeah, definitely familiar with Hick's Law.
It's basically all about, you know how the number of choices that you have affects how long it takes to make a decision?
Right. Yeah.
So more choices equals more decision time?
Yeah, it's kind of intuitive, right?
But there's some nuance to it, right? Because it's not just like a straight linear thing.
Exactly. That's what's so fascinating about Hick's Law. It's not just like, oh, if you double the choices, you double the decision time. It's a little bit more complex than that.
Right. And to unpack it all, we've got some excerpts here from the Wikipedia article on Hick's Law.
Sounds good.
So first off, who are these Hick and Hyman people that we're talking about?
Well, Hick and Hyman were both psychologists, pretty influential in the field of cognitive psychology.
Okay.
They really kind of helped us understand how our brains work, how we process information, and ultimately how we make decisions.
But get this. The idea actually goes back even further than Hick and Hyman.
Oh, really?
To 1868
Wow.
with a scientist named Franciscus Donders.
Okay.
And he was already doing experiments that were showing this connection between having multiple choices and your reaction time being slower.
That's pretty amazing. It seems like a lot of these really fundamental ideas in psychology have roots that go way back.
Yeah, for sure. So Donders kind of laid the groundwork
Mm-hmm.
for what Hick and Hyman would later develop into this more formalized law.
Right.
So let's jump ahead now to 1951.
Okay.
This is when Hick does this famous experiment with 10 lamps and Morse keys.
I've heard about this one. It sounds pretty intense.
It's kind of like you have to press the right key as different lights flash.
I can imagine that would be a pretty challenging experiment to be a participant in.
Yeah, right. And what I thought was cool is that he was using a 4-bit binary system to record his results.
Oh, wow. That's pretty high tech for 1951.
I know, right? These guys were innovators.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so now let's get to the heart of it all, which is the formula for Hick's Law.
All right, let's do it.
I know formulas can be scary, but trust me, this one's important to get.
I'm sure we can break it down.
Yeah. So what it's saying basically is that as the number of choices goes up, the time it takes to make a decision also goes up.
Right.
But not in a straight line.
Okay.
It's a logarithmic relationship.
I was going to ask about that. What does that mean exactly when you say logarithmic?
Yeah. So
Can you give us a relatable example maybe?
yeah, definitely. So think about it like this.
Okay.
You're trying to choose between 2 flavors of ice cream.
Okay, I can do that.
So, adding a third flavor to the mix, that's going to make your decision a little bit harder.
Mm-hmm.
But if you then add a 4th or a 5th or a 10th flavor,
Right.
doesn't make the decision that much harder each time.
It's not like a huge jump in decision time every time you add a flavor.
Exactly.
Okay, so each additional choice has less and less of an impact.
Right. Kind of like diminishing returns.
Yeah.
You learned about that in economics.
That's a good analogy. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Okay. And then this is where Ray Hyman's work comes in.
All right.
He was using a matrix of lights in his experiments.
Okay.
And he kind of helped us understand even more this relationship between reaction time and how many choices we've got.
So you've got Hick with the flashing lights and Hyman with the matrix of lights.
Right. They're both trying to figure out how our brains work with choices.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really crazy.
Oh, boy.
There's this connection between how fast you make decisions and your IQ.
No way.
This psychologist named Roth, he found that people with higher IQs tend to be able to process information faster.
So they can make decisions more quickly, even when they've got tons of options to choose from.
Right. So, you're telling me that if I can choose between 10 different cereals really fast,
Yeah.
that means I've got a high IQ.
Well, not exactly, but it does suggest that there's a link there.
That's what.
Right. It kind of makes you think about all the different factors that play into decision making.
This is already making me rethink all my decisions.
Yeah, it's pretty thought-provoking.
So is it all about just how fast our brains work then?
It's definitely a big part of it.
Okay.
But there's another piece to the puzzle, and it's called stimulus-response compatibility.
Okay, hold on. Break that down for me.
Sure.
What does that even mean?
Okay, so think about it like this.
All right.
If you want to turn a car to the left, you turn the steering wheel to the left.
Yeah.
Right? The action you take and the result you get, they match up perfectly.
Right.
So your brain doesn't have to work very hard to figure it out.
Yeah, it's intuitive.
Exactly. That's stimulus-response compatibility.
Okay.
Basically, the easier it is to connect the stimulus to the right response, the faster your reaction time is going to be.
So if the choices that I have are designed in a way that makes sense to my brain, I can make decisions faster, even if there's lots of options.
That's the general idea.
Okay.
But like a lot of things in life,
Yeah.
Hick's law isn't always like black and white, you know?
Really? So there's exceptions.
There are some exceptions to the rule.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one of the most interesting ones is when you're searching for a word in a random list. In those cases, your reaction time actually increases in a straight line as the number of words on the list increases.
So it's not logarithmic like we were just talking about.
Right. It doesn't follow that same pattern.
So why is that? Why doesn't Hick's law apply in those cases?
It's because when you're looking at a random list, you can't really use any like mental shortcuts or categories to help you find what you're looking for.
Oh, okay.
You have to basically scan each word individually.
Yeah.
And that obviously takes more and more time as the list gets longer.
So it's like, trying to find a needle in a haystack,
Exactly.
but you have no idea, what the haystack even looks like.
Right. You're just sort of randomly searching.
All right. So knowing all this about Hick's law now,
Yeah.
how can we actually use this to make better decisions in our everyday lives?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
Well, one area where people often try to apply Hick's law is in menu design.
Okay. Yeah. Like websites or apps that have tons of options.
Right. Think about those situations where you're just like completely overwhelmed by all the choices.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You don't even know where to start.
Like decision paralysis almost.
Exactly.
So are you saying then that designers should always aim for fewer options?
Well, it's tempting to think that, right?
Yeah.
But it's not always that simple.
Okay.
Because remember, Hick's law is really talking about the time it takes to make a decision when all the choices are equally likely to be chosen.
Okay.
And in a menu, that's usually not the case.
Right. We usually kind of have an idea of what we're looking for.
Exactly. Like if you're looking for the Contact Us page on a website,
Yeah.
you're not going to spend time considering all the other options on the menu.
I just want to find that one thing.
Right. You just want to get there as quickly as possible.
Exactly.
And so if the menu is well organized, even if it has a lot of items, you can still find what you need pretty quickly.
So it's not just about having less stuff on the menu.
Right.
It's about organizing it in a way that makes sense to our brains.
Exactly. Like using alphabetical order for a long list of items.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Even if the list is super long, you can use your knowledge of the alphabet to zero in on what you're looking for much faster
Right.
than if the items were just randomly arranged.
Yep, for sure. So Hick's law can be a useful guideline,
Uh-huh.
but it's not like a one-size-fits-all rule for menu design.
Exactly. It's more nuanced than that.
So it seems like context really matters here.
Absolutely.
We have to think about the probability of choosing each option,
Right.
how the choices are organized,
Uh-huh.
even our own prior knowledge.
All those things come into play.
Okay, so Hick's law gives us a good foundation
Yeah.
for understanding this stuff,
It helps us understand the basic principles.
but it's only one piece of the puzzle.
Right. There's always more to the story.
So what does this all mean for us, the everyday decision makers out there?
Well, it means that understanding Hick's law can be a really powerful tool for improving our own decision-making processes.
You mean by being aware of how the number of choices affects our decision time?
Exactly. And by recognizing that more choices don't always lead to better decisions.
So we can kind of simplify our lives by being more intentional about the choices that we present ourselves with.
That's the idea. We can focus on creating clear, well-organized systems for navigating those choices.
And maybe even learning to be more comfortable with making decisions quickly,
Right.
even when there's tons of options.
Exactly. Becoming more decisive.
So as you go about your day, think about Hick's law.
Okay.
How can you apply it to streamline your decision making?
That's a good challenge.
Whether it's choosing what to eat for lunch
Yeah.
or what path to take in life.
It applies to all sorts of decisions.
Food for thought, right?
Definitely. Something to chew on. Yeah, it really is something to think about.
Okay. So we've learned about Hick's law, how it works, even where it doesn't always apply.
Right.
But what's the big takeaway here?
Well, I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that we often feel overwhelmed by choices.
Yeah.
Because we don't realize that our brains are actually kind of wired to handle them in a certain way.
So instead of getting frustrated
Yeah.
when we have too many options,
Uh-huh.
we can try to understand why that happens
Mm-hmm.
and then use strategies to simplify our decisions.
Exactly. And there are lots of practical things we can do.
Okay.
One of the simplest is just to be more aware of how many choices you're actually facing at any given time.
Okay.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed,
Yeah.
try to break down the decision into smaller steps
Okay.
with fewer options at each step.
That's like when I'm trying to choose a movie on like Netflix or something. Instead of just scrolling through hundreds of titles,
Yeah.
I can first narrow it down by genre or mood.
Exactly. You're essentially reducing the number of choices your brain has to process
Okay.
at any given time,
Makes sense.
which can make the decision feel a lot less overwhelming.
Another thing I've started doing is creating checklists or templates
Oh, yeah.
for decisions that I make pretty regularly.
That's a great strategy.
That way I don't have to start from scratch every time.
Right. You've already got a predefined set of options,
Yeah.
which can really speed up your decision-making process.
And it frees up my mental energy to focus on more important things.
You're not wasting your cognitive resources on those small decisions.
Yeah. So knowing about Hick's law has definitely made me more conscious of how I approach decision making.
That's great to hear.
I try to organize my choices better,
Mm-hmm.
break down complex decisions,
Yeah.
even limit my options when it makes sense.
It's all about being more intentional
Right.
and taking control of your own decision-making process.
It's like having a secret weapon for navigating the world of choices.
I like that analogy.
So to wrap it all up, Hick's law basically tells us that more choices equals more decision time,
Right.
but not in a straightforward way.
Uh-huh.
It's a logarithmic relationship,
Right.
meaning those additional choices have less and less of an impact.
Exactly. It's not a linear increase.
And while Hick's law isn't always applicable,
Right.
understanding it can help us make better choices in our everyday lives.
Absolutely.
We can simplify our decision-making by being aware of how many choices we face,
Uh-huh.
organizing those choices effectively,
Yeah.
and even breaking down complex decisions into smaller, more manageable steps.
Great advice.
So next time you're feeling overwhelmed by choices, just remember Hick's law
Okay.
and all the tools that you have to make those decisions more efficiently.
It's all about understanding how your brain works
Right.
and using that knowledge to your advantage.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive into Hick's law.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff.
Until next time.
Take care.